All right, everybody. Thank you again for being with us tonight. If I could get you to go ahead and take a seat at your tables. There is some food at the back of the room from Chef Drew. You're welcome to help yourselves before you grab a seat. Also, a beverage station in the back corner of the room there. For all of you attending virtually on Zoom, thank you very much for joining us. A little bit of housekeeping in that regard. We certainly hope you can hear us loud and clear with the audio, but we will ask that you remain muted throughout the presentation. If you have questions for us, you're welcome to enter some of those into the chat, and we will circle back on those when we get to the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, my name is Brian Stone. I'm the General Manager and COO here at Westwood Country Club. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. This is the first time that we're doing this presentation and this committee member onboarding, but I was thrilled when our president, Mr. Fico, expressed how interested he was in making this happen. We have a great partnership with Ken Butler and the team at Club Benchmarking. It's something that they highly recommend in trying to get everybody unified and understanding of best practices in committee involvement and governance as we enter the year, and it's going to be an exciting year here at the club. So I want to pass things off to President Fico here to get things started on the presentation. Make sure, okay, could you click on the sheet itself? There we go. And this should be live to go. So thank you again. Thanks, Brian. First of all, let me just echo Brian's thanks. I appreciate everybody being here on a Sunday, very cold Sunday. And for those of you at home, just hope you can hear me. If you can't, please put something in the chat and I'll speak louder. But on behalf of the board, I think just about almost everybody from the board is here. Board members, you want to just raise your hands real quick? So I think all but one or two of the board members are here. So on their behalf, I want to thank you all. This is the first time we've ever done this event. And I just wanted to mention, why are we here? This is not a matter of trying to teach anyone how to be a Westwood board member. Westwood committee member. Many of you have more committee experience than I do, so it's not about that. It is, though, about hopefully getting all of us, as we kick off the year, aligned around some common priorities and objectives, around some agreed ways of working together, so that we can make the best use of your time being very gracious to volunteer your time for the club. We want to make the most of that and also make you most effective, all of us most effective, in being representatives of the membership as a whole. And so we'll talk more about that. And also to share some information from Ken and from Club Benchmarking about what do the best clubs in the country do. And I hope you will see, as we on the board saw, that when you look at what the best clubs do, you see a lot of Westwood in those characteristics. And I've certainly had the good fortune in a few years I've been on the board to see some of the progress we've made along that way. And as we get into talking about what our priorities are for this year, you'll see a lot of it is about continuing that journey. How do we continue to be, not just a good club in the area, but one of the best? And how do we continue to just refine the way we manage the club, the way we conduct governance and represent the membership, and the way we plan for the future. So again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to spend a few minutes just I went the wrong way. Sharing the agenda. So we're going to talk a little bit for a few minutes about just sort of where are we, state of the club, some very, very high level financial information. This is not meant to be any kind of deep dive on financials, but if you do have questions, please ask, not only on financials, but on anything. If questions get very detailed, particularly on finances, we can always have a separate session on that. But we will talk a little bit about where are we right now as we look to start the year, calendar 2024. Bill Stakos, who's a member of the board who unfortunately is not here today, took some time to put together a document about committee best practices.
And it's something that I'm hoping, and I'd like to ask all of the committee members. We'll flip those slides today, but we're not going to go through every bullet point in detail. But I would like you all to read those later on. We'll distribute copies of these slides, particularly the Bill Stakos committee best practices section. I'd like you all to take a look at. And I think if we all go into the year with that sort of mindset, then again, it will raise the effectiveness of what we do to be as impactful as it can be. We'll then turn over to Ken to share with us some insights about characteristics of highest performing clubs. And as he'll talk about, club benchmarking looks at over 1,000 clubs every year and gathers a great deal of data about how they conduct themselves, characteristics, results, and best practices. And he's going to share some of that with us. And then finally, we'll spend a few minutes in a breakout session so for those in the room, I should say, and I'll clarify this, for those of us in the room, we'll spend the last few minutes in each of your committees in a little breakout just to get organized before you kick off for the year. Talk a little bit about the plan and structures that each committee will have, and you know, as you go into 2024. And the goal here is to have everybody out by about 6 so we can see the second half of the games, and hopefully everyone will stick around for that. So and it's slides are turning when I turn them on here. Okay, great. Just a quick check, Eric. Can you tell us, as far as you know, everybody can hear us online? Okay, great. So just a quick flash here. You've seen, I'm sure you've all seen this before, our mission, vision, and core values. One of the reasons for having this prominently in this presentation is as you go through your committee activities this year, it's important to keep this in mind. When I was coming out of the board, one of the first things the board had on its agenda was rolling out this mission, vision, and core values. And to me, one of the biggest questions was how do we keep this real and not something that just hangs on the wall? And so I would ask, as you go through your committees this year, to keep these things in mind. If we're thinking about the golf course, for instance, you know, how are we, you know, acting as stewards for this property and for, you know, this great asset that we have and making it better all the time, as we're, you know, thinking about on House Committee, you know, how are we going to live up to this goal of leadership in our industry? And so I'd like to just invite everybody to keep these handy for every committee meeting, and every once in a while ask yourselves if the activities of our committees and these core functions that we represent are advancing these goals.
Today's 7 or today's 8. Oh, so on Tuesday we raise the and then we all get practice Wednesday.
Again, similarly with the club purpose, I think you know, trying to keep in mind that we're here to represent the members, here to give them a great experience, and here to continue to build you know, this great place that we all know and love. Okay, jumping into committees themselves, and again, just to orient us, one of the things I got to do in my first 2 years on the board was actually chair the bylaws committee, which was, I think I got the short straw in the first meeting when they're handing out committee assignments, but I actually really enjoyed it because if you actually start to study the bylaws, you can see a lot of where the governance in the club comes from, how do we manage the place, and what are the mechanisms that allow us to do what we do to continue to advance Westwood. I would ask that you I'm not going to ask everybody to go and read all the bylaws, but I would ask that you look at the sections that are relevant to the committees. And so Article 4 is the part part of the bylaws that actually gives the committees their sanction. It's the place where it sets the governance structure that says the board is in charge of overseeing the club. The management team operates the club, and the committees represent the members in bringing what are the interests of the members and what are the facilities we want to have, what are the amenities we want to have, what's important to the members in each of these functional areas, whether it's ground, whether it's golf, whether it's house, whether it's membership, etc. So take a look at least your section so you can see what the charge of your committee is in the bylaws and understand what you are actually being asked.
4:25 is the Bears game. And the Eagles game too. Want to just order something in tonight?
Thank you. Just briefly, these are the committees. I think you will all recognize the names of these. The only thing I wanted to mention here, we will, as we get into club priorities for the year in a few minutes, you will see that one of the things that I do want to talk about is communications and getting better at communications. Communications has historically sat within the IT committee, another committee I was on in my first year, and members of the Bill and Mike Fulkerson and I have talked about this. In my view, I think our approach to communications in some ways has been fairly tactical in the past, and we want to actually be a little bit more strategic, a little more thoughtful in how do we bring the messages that we feel like we really need to be communicating to the members in an effective way. What are those key messages and how does that align with our strategy and what we're trying to achieve this year? So one thing I've asked the committees to do is our approach to communications this year will be a little bit more strategic. It'll be a little bit of a joint effort between the IT committee and the membership committee. So you will see that being a little bit different for those of you who are on those committees this year. I'm clicking, but I'm not sure if it's what I'm doing or what you're doing, or if it's actually advancing the slides. Thank you. So as we said, there is some language in the bylaws that talks about what our committee's there for. And one of the things it says, and you see it sort of in the second paragraph here on this slide, committees are advisory except for the audit committee, which means that your role is to represent the members, and in whatever area we're talking about, whichever committee you're on, bringing forth what are the facilities we want to have, what are the amenities we want to have, what is the experience we want our members to have in each of these functional areas, and making recommendations about what those are. The bylaws vest the actual responsibility to ultimately make decisions on those things with the board. But we're going to talk a little bit more as we go about how I hope to see the dynamic between what you all in the committees bring forth and how the board puts it into action. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more as we go. We're going to spend a few minutes, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about some state of the club information on financial position and how we manage the finances of the club. I do want to talk about this for a second. I'm not going to get into the numbers. I'm going to leave that to Brian. But as certainly the folks on the finance committee know, in the last couple of years, the club has gotten, and we have gotten, a lot more discipline about separating the way we look after the operating results of the club and planning for and looking after the operating results of the club and the capital side of our activity. And for those of you, and I know the folks on finance know this up and down and sideways, but and Ken will talk about this more, but the way the finances of the club should work is we've got the operating side and we've got our capital side. And we have done a better job in the last few years of keeping these distinct. The goal on the top of this page on the operating side should be to break even. Everything you see in the revenue line is our basic dues, all the fees we charge for golf carts or tennis lessons or anything else like that, things we buy in the pro shop. assets and got a third party looking at, when you look at all these facilities and the appreciation on these assets and how much we've been using them and how we'll have to replace them in the next number of years, what does our budget really need to look like? And even on, we all know, of course, that we recently opened all these great new facilities, but all the rest of this building and the rest of our assets here are, continue to be used every year, and we need to continue to maintain them and do the capital expenditures necessary to keep the place how we want it. And so we need to figure out what that's going to be. That's going to be a big focus of where we are here. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Brian to get into some of the details.
Yeah.
I hope everybody at home can still see us. We just had an interesting message on the screen there, but if not, please enter a comment in the chat. So thank you, Mr. Fico. Appreciate the introduction and sharing this slide. And so really what you see here, some of this is a little bit redundant. The next few slides, actually, if you were able to participate in the annual meeting back on November 16th, where we covered a lot of the performance from the prior year. And one of the major priorities, as Mr. Fico mentioned, is getting back to that break-even operating budget and therefore maximizing our ability to use the dollars in the capital fund for the replacement of depreciated assets, obligatory capital, et cetera. The study that Mr. Fico mentioned is kind of the third pillar of our upcoming 5-year strategic plan. The first and second pillars being the member experience survey, talking about, at a pretty granular level, what are the satisfaction levels like about the different elements of our operation and the different committees, which all of you will be participating in. The second was the member vision survey, talking a little bit more about who are we now? What do we want to be known for? What do we hope to be known for 5 years from now? And that third pillar being a capital asset study. So we engaged a third party to come in and from the ground up, room to room, acre by acre, they did a full study of any of our assets of $2,500 or more with a useful life of 5 years or more. And they are meant to help us then evaluate what that looks like in the coming years to determine if we're in a proper position with capital funding in order to maintain those and keep those things up to the standards that our club should keep, which in all, I think all of our opinions should be at a very elite and prestigious level. And so what you see at the top here, Mr. Fico mentioned sort of just the operating budget of the club. And so really thrilled with the efforts of our team last year. Even with a pretty significant dues increase, there was a budgeted deficit of about $350,000 for fiscal year 2023 that just concluded at September 30th. We were able to cut into that deficit by about $300,000, resulting in only about a $50,000 subsidy, if you will, coming from the capital fund to the operating deficit. This year, we've built a budget that produces a net positive of $56,000. And obviously, it's very early in the year, but through the first quarter, we're pleased to announce that we're ahead of that budget and trending really well moving forward. So that's an enormous thing that needs to continue. This is not a one-off. This just needs to be the business structure and model of this club. And ultimately, I'd love to be up here every November saying there's nothing to see here. Our team has it under control. The volume of business and revenues at the club are exactly where we want it to be. We hope to be efficient with our expenses, but also, maintaining all of our service levels, hospitality, quality of product, et cetera. You get into the capital fund element, and there's obviously any number of things that contribute to this. But one that is interesting, and while it's a wonderful luxury to have, it also presents a bit of a challenge, and that is a massive wait list that we've developed here over the years. What that means, of course, is that while it's terrific to have so much interest and desire for the club, we're now earning $105,000 for a full golf initiation fee. I think that's really competitive in this market and talks a lot about the position of this club, the desirability of our club. But the influx of those dollars is only as real as the attrition and the turnover of the membership. And so there's a bit of a limitation, whereas a few years ago, as we were really, striving to fill the club and to get to a full membership, you could see a mass influx of those initiation fee revenues. Having said that, still a very healthy number. And what happened last year was, some of that could be contingent also on whether or not people decide to pay cash for their initiation versus financing those dollars. And that obviously has an immediate impact on that top line of initiation fees, deposits, installments, and LRP dollars. The building dues, as everyone knows, I think date back to the first renovation of this clubhouse. And then were again increased about 12, 13 years ago with the golf course renovation. And then again, 2 years ago with a dues increase back in 2022. But they're producing about $900,000 in capital fund money for the club. And then the outgoing dollars, of course, are bank debt and repayment. As I think everybody's familiar, we have a pretty substantial balance of member refundable equity and member debt, which happens when members resign who had been here, made contributions to the capital fund in the past with the promises of reimbursement at the back end, and then our capital leases as well. At the bottom here, you see the capital expenditure forecast. We're still closing out the final touches of the long-range plan phase 2 Racket Center project. That should be done here in the next 30 days, which we're pleased to put behind us. And then you have 2024 annual operating capital. Now, I think what's important to note here is that number of the 1.225 million is actually more significant than any reinvestment of operating capital that we've made in this club in about 10 years, setting aside, of course, LRP1 and LRP2 investments. What I believe we will determine when this capital asset study comes back is that while that number is substantially higher than it has been in previous years, it's still likely not high enough to keep up with the depreciation and, again, the obligatory maintenance of the facilities that we enjoy every day. And then, of course, the new $16 million of LRP1 and 2 facilities that will, of course, begin to age and depreciate as well. So in this year, you might look at the bottom number and say, well, $440,000 movement to the negative in a cash position isn't a great thing. I would agree with that. I will say we have spent the last couple of years building those dollars. We've had some really healthy initiation fee years and incoming revenue in that regard. The other piece to keep in mind is that the membership did approve a bridge loan repayment of LRP dollars, which are still coming in, that will be paid off in the year 2025. And then that amount of about $450,000 a year goes away in its entirety. But this is where we're going to want to keep our attention to find out, how well are we positioned from the capital side of the business, knowing that our management team is really focused on a break even or better net operating income on an annual basis. Next slide. Again, so the cash position, almost $3.5 million at the end of fiscal 2023, a really healthy position, particularly if you look back at year end 2020 after COVID, which was obviously a very stressful time on the club with a whole lot of variables entering into the performance on an annual basis, but have built up to a really healthy position that we're comfortable with, that we're proud of. And now it'll be about studying the reality of our needs moving forward as part of this 5-year plan, and well beyond that to determine what that position needs to look like and how we fund those things moving forward. Again, this is a bit redundant to the annual meeting, but the important piece here is if you remove things like the CARES Act credit related to employee retention credits during COVID, the bottom line here was concerning. And I give a lot of credit to the finance committee and the board to say, look, while we might have the cash to subsidize the operating deficit, that is not a best practice. And Ken will touch on this a little bit moving forward, that ultimately this line here needs to be in this type of range, within 0.5%. Would be an ideal position of a variance, and that way all of the capital funds are used where they're intended. So you can see the trends from 2018 even through 2022, really challenging, particularly with the removal of those CARES credits. But that came in handy, of course, in a year where we lost $2 million in banquet business as a result of the pandemic. But now, again, pleased to point out that we have a positive number here for the 2024 budget and have every intention of meeting and exceeding that budget. Capital expenditures. So I mentioned there's a couple different levels of capital. There's going to be obviously the desire and need for some really substantial investment. One of the things that the Vision survey pointed out was the membership's desire to invest in the pool and the pool infrastructure, which now, of course, remains about a 60-year-old, 70-year-old asset that sits between a brand new clubhouse and a brand new racket center and is in need of some love and attention. Those things I would consider maybe aspirational capital, but certainly substantial dollars that are above and beyond what you're going to see on a sheet like this This represents operating capital, that we call it. And so each year, management, the board, and the different committees talk about their priorities. And so one of the things you'll be tasked with this year in each of your committee rooms is to talk about what are our capital needs. Capital being, again, an expense of $2,500 or more with a life of 5 years or more, and where should we be recommending to the board that those dollars be spent. So the process, just so you're familiar, the committee will bring forth a proposal of capital, working with their department head and management team to do so. The finance committee obviously reviews it, talks about the validity of that request, the opportunity to satisfy that request within the confines or scope of the operating capital budget rather. And then it goes to the board for final approval, after which we move forward with the purchase or repair and replacement of an asset. So some of the things that you see here, this room that we're sitting in right now, Janie and her team drive $2.5 to $3 million of revenue to our club between member events and non-member events, private events, and the like. And it's obviously in need of a bit of a refresh. So carpet, paint, drapes, and AV, that's a good example of a pretty substantial investment in our club, and one that has a really significant ROI for us as well. There's other things that are going to be less sexy, a low slope roof. The fact that we replace this carpet and drapes and don't have water pouring into the room is going to be equally important, but maybe something that's not quite as visible to the membership. So these are just some examples, and obviously there's substantially more that goes into every year's budget, but wanted to make sure we refresh everyone on that process as well. Along the lines, we continue to retire debt. And so this is just a layout of the debt that's been taken care of in 2023 and what's budgeted or scheduled to be retired in 2024. We feel comfortable with our debt position. There are a number of things that go into that. As I mentioned, our primary mortgage on the property with John Marshall Bank, which we're thrilled to be at a 2.89% rate, which was really ideal timing and some great work on the finance committee's behalf to secure that loan through an RFP process at a really ideal time in the club's history. Additionally, the bridge loan repayment on the acceleration of LRP1, excuse me, and then of course the member debt and member refundable obligation. That debt is entirely based on the schedule of the resignation of individuals. So it's a little bit hard to predict, but we maintain a $300,000 placeholder in our forecast each year for that. Organizational chart. We wanted to put this up here more for your purposes. I think everyone here has obviously probably spent a number of years at the club. Hopefully you've gotten to know the department heads that you're going to be working with in each capacity. But we did, I know it's going to be impossible to read probably in the room here, but we did want to put the committees that are related to each of the individual department heads. So for instance, Kathy Bucher, our CFO, with finance, audit, and LRP, Director of Grounds, David McGregor, working with the Grounds Committee this year. And so you can see this, as Mr. Fico mentioned, we will be sending out a PDF of the entire presentation as well. So no need to get out the readers here, but we'll circulate this as well. So I'm going to hand it back over to Paul Fico to talk about some of the club initiatives that the board have looked at and what we hope to circulate with our committees moving forward. Thanks, Brian.
A couple of years ago, the club started down a journey that started with bringing Brian and a really strong new management team on board in a number of areas. Obviously, designing, envisioning, and selling to the membership this great vision for all of for LRP1, LRP2, all these great changes and additions we've made to the club. And there's a number of you in the room that I know were huge parts of that. And you guys all deserve tremendous credit for getting all that done. If you think about where we are, and I think in that process, we went from being a good club to being one of the best country clubs in the area. And I say that with confidence, not just because I believe it, but also because it's backed up by a lot of what I think you'll hear from Ken. So when we think about priorities for 2024, a lot of it is to continue that journey, continue to refine the way we manage the club, the way we govern the club, and putting in place some of the things that will enhance member experience, put us on a stronger footing, and hopefully institute some disciplines and some best practices that will continue down the road and just continue to refine and make us better. So when we look at what some of the club initiatives are and sort of high-level priorities are for 2024 at the board level, and hopefully, this will flow through to a lot of what all of you are doing as well. So And to varying extents, the committees will get involved in these activities. But completion of the strategic plan, as Brian said, that comes from the data we gathered in the various member surveys, looking at things like the pool and irrigation system, locker room renovation, other changes, other enhancements we want to do, as Ken will talk about. And as much as some members might want to think, well, we did all this great stuff, now we can just sort of relax for a while. That's not what the best clubs do, and that's not how we're going to put ourselves in the best position for the future. So thinking about what is the next 5 years going to bring us is a critical step that we've got to complete this year. We talked about the capital asset study. I think that's going to be an important part in figuring out how do we make sure we've got sufficient flow coming in terms of capital funding so that we can keep this place, operating and keep it in the great shape it's in. An interesting thing that I remember was one of the first questions I asked when people started talking to me about running for the board, and I started talking to the nominating committee, and they said, "What are the questions in your mind?" And I said, "Well, I think," and it was about that time we were just moving from trying to drive membership in the club to having this wait list. And an interesting thing that happens is when we think about the inflow of capital funds that will fund the building and fund our maintenance and make sure that the roof isn't leaking on the new carpet and things like that, and that we have what we need going forward, we can't go out and say, let's just go get some new members and fund it with initiation fees. The control of initiation fee revenue is no longer in our hands to go sell memberships. We get new members, we get new initiation fees when people leave the club, and we can bring people off that wait list. So that means that the thing that's in our control is the capital dues. And so a big part of what we'll do this year is figure out, are we off on what those capital dues need to be in order to be where we want to be going forward. So completion of that capital asset study is an important part of that. I talked about a more strategic approach to member communication, setting the tone, figuring out what are the key messages, just like a large organization, really well-run company would do. What are the key messages we want to be conveying, both internally and externally, to our stakeholders, and how do we do that effectively? Westwood Care is something near and dear to my heart. A number of you know that. I've had a lot to do with getting that going and getting that thing really up and running as the foundation entity, so that it's a sort of its own ongoing thing and can somewhat semi-autonomously continue to operate going forward. And then lastly, completion of the management development plan. And what that really is what the best run organizations do is they have succession plans. They have development plans for their key executives. Brian and I talk, and I say, when you look at sort of some of your key people, we need to make sure we understand what their career goals are. What are the things we can be doing to help make them the absolute best in their profession? External development, internal development, helping them build their brand both inside the club and in the industry. Back to that core value that said we want to be leaders in the industry. One of the ways we do that is having fantastic leaders in our management team and helping them develop their own careers. So just like a well-run company would do, that's something that we want to institute this year and going forward. Talked about the 5-year strategic plan, and all of the above, as I just went through, will flow through to you guys on the committees in various ways. And obviously, some very, very direct ways, like the LRP, the Long Range Plan Committee will have a lot to do with completion of that strategic plan. But I think a lot of what we talked about will involve all of you sitting in this room and those of you on the phone. So I wanted to share that with you so that you could hopefully be not only a part of thinking about how we accomplish those things, giving us feedback on how are we accomplishing them throughout the year, and then sharing it with the membership. And when you're talking to members and they ask, what are the committees doing? What is the overall group of people that are all of us who are entrusted with sort of moving our club forward in 2024, what are your priorities? And you can help hopefully communicate these. Brian and I got to attend a day-long session a couple of months ago. Folks from, I don't know if Ken, were you there personally? So Ken was there from Club Benchmarking. this organization, Copland, Keebler, and Wallace, and Club Management Association. I think they were the three that put it on, right, Brian? Three organizations that spend just about all their time with country clubs and other kinds of social clubs around the country, and really are observers and advisors on how clubs can be at their best. And so Brian and I spent a day at that. One of the presentations that I thought was really good was about what do the best clubs sort of have in common. And they were talking a lot about the extended leadership team of the club, and that's us, right? It's the board, it's the committee members, it's the management team. And what are some of the characteristics that they share? And I'm not going to go through every one of these, but there are a couple that I'd like to highlight. And again, invite you all to read these when you get this, when you get the PDF. But a couple of things to me really stand out. So this has a little pointer, right? Yeah. So I think this is a good one. You don't do things just because that's the way we've always done it. And I think that is something that we have. That's a philosophy and a way of thinking that we have evolved to as a club over the last several years. And I think we need to continue to do that. We talked about being conscious about succession planning. That's up there somewhere. Slide's a little bitty, I won't find it. There it is. Conscious about succession planning. That's something, again, that we're going to be doing. And not only succession planning, but development and how we develop our key people. And again, strategy for effective communications, as we talked about. So these are what some of the best performing clubs do. Another page here. I think the first one is an interesting one. Running the club like a business. And so that isn't just necessarily about efficiency and operations and making sure we're, counting every bottle of wine and et cetera, but it's also about what do the best run organizations do, like some of the things we're talking about, and how do we put them in place here? And then lastly, the last thing I want to mention here is, I think it's on there somewhere, is that committees have clearly defined objectives. Last year, Bill Doyle, as our president, asked all the committees to formally write down on a piece of paper at the beginning of the year, what are your objectives, what's sort of your charter for the year? And it's everything from, sharing when the meetings are going to be, to also how do we want to work together and what are the goals we have for the year. We did that again this year. If you haven't seen that yet, hopefully you will shortly. But that kind of discipline is an example of what some of the best clubs do, and something we do already, and I think want to continue to do. The next few pages are the deck that Bill Stakos put together for the board and for all of us on effective committee engagement. And again, I'm not going to go through these bullet by bullet. I would ask all of you to read them. I would ask all of you to think about in your committees, are we holding ourselves to these standards, and use them as a guide to how we work together. But I'm just going to touch on a few things. There's things in here about committee formation, about being thoughtful about how we choose who are going to be on the committees, respecting the time that you all are volunteering to the club. Most of this has already taken place. How we execute the actual meetings, again, being conscious of how we use your time, trying to keep this, my personal favorite, keeping all committee meetings to no more than 90 minutes. I try to do 60 minutes in my committees, but sometimes it gets a little longer. But these are going to guide how we actually conduct the meetings. There we go. Sorry, catching up on my pages here. We talked about clear mandates and goals. We talked about communication. Again, I'm not going to read every one of these, but you can see what some of them are. I'd like you all to read them when you have a chance. A few things on here I would like to touch on in particular, and to me, these are the most important two. The very bottom of the page says, committee members place interests of the broader membership above their own views or their interest groups. So you are all on committees because you volunteered, you raised your hands and said, I want to give some of my time to the club. You obviously have ideas of how you think we can make Westwood better. You are users of the club, you are members, you are users of our facilities, and I'm sure there are things in your own minds that you'd like to see us do better or do differently. You also represent people when you're here. You know, if you are a over 65 male golfer and you sort of represent that group, or you are on the one of the women's tennis teams, or you're you're on one of the committees because you run the swim teams, or whatever it might be. It's important that you not only think about your own views and not only think about the group that subgroup that you represent, but also the broader membership. And as you come into committee meetings and we talk about issues, you're representing the entire club, not just your own sort of group. And lastly, and this is something that we talked about when I was became president. I asked the club to make one capital purchase, and I think we did. I asked Brian if we could buy a portable whiteboard, one that kind of wheels around, and we did, right? We have it somewhere, and hopefully we have some markers, some whiteboard markers.
It's huge.
Too, because the whiteboard's no good without markers. But and I'm serious about this. Like, I would love to see committees say, we're going to have our committee meeting, we need the whiteboard. I put it on the bullet here and worked with Bill on this to say, I would like us to have what I called a solutions mindset, which means we don't just come into a committee meeting and say, hey, my friends are all complaining about the bunkers, or my friends think we need to, open the pool at a different time, or I really, think we need to do X, Y, or Z. Move to the state. We need to do those things. We need to get those issues on the table, but then move to the stage of, all right, let's try to come up with some solutions and some ideas. So have a solutions mindset to everything you discuss. Again, this last bullet refers back to looking at judging ourselves on what are we accomplishing on the committees, and then referring back to those core values. Are we advancing the values of the club and the stewardship that is inherent in what those values talk about? I know I'm going through these quickly, but you'll be able to look at them later. Next couple slides talk about how the board engages with the committees. As I mentioned before, technically, the way it says in the bylaws, the committees are advisory to the board. Certain ones play very distinct and specialized roles, like finance kind of takes what the rest of the committees recommends and says, can we afford it? And deals with managing the financial stewardship of the club. But all the committee activities and recommendations and decisions that you make ultimately are entrusted to the board to enact and validate. One of the things that you'll see it says on here is include committee input in decision making. It's always been my view, and some of you here I'm on the board with now, some of you here were members of the board in my first couple of years. And you'll know this, it's always been my first inclination when anything comes in front of the board to say, if the committee's recommending something and we think something different needs to be done beyond, or different from what they're recommending, we need to have a real good reason for that. You guys volunteer your time, you're all trusted Westwood members, you all have, you're all successful people, you all come with tremendous talent to these committees, and you're making thoughtful decisions. And so we should be trusting what you are recommending. And if we have a reason for taking a different approach or making some modification to what you're recommending, then we should be prepared to tell you why. And so that's going to be something that we will do this year. And I know that's not always been the case. And I think last year, a great example, we all know we had this very sensitive issue around legacy. Membership committee did a lot of work on trying to figure out what should be the right approach to that. The board spent, in my view, way too much time talking about all of these various iterations and complications with it. And some folks like Bill Doyle and Bill Stako spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure it all out. It's a very complicated issue. And members of the membership committee might have thought, well, we did all this work and then the board took things in a slightly different direction. And there will be times when things are very sensitive, very complex, where we will have to, as a board, take what you recommend and continue to work it and move it maybe to a different place ultimately. But when we do that, we're going to have a good reason, and that's a commitment I want to make to all of you as we go into this year. And then lastly, just overall, again, thank you all for spending time with us, not only today, but the time you're going to spend in the coming year. I'm here all the time, and I'm here all the time because I love this place. And so I'm grateful to all of you for just trying to make it better all the time. So, my commitment to you guys is to use your time wisely as best we can. Try to make to the extent I have the ability to do it, your experience being on committees in the club, a positive one and something that you enjoy and find value in. And so if there's ever any thing I can do to try to make that better, please let me know. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Brian to get to the next part of our agenda.
Nope, not at all.
All right, so next, it's my pleasure to introduce Ken Butler from Club Benchmarking. 2 years ago, we engaged with Club Benchmarking Company, as Spico mentioned, that Ken will tell you a little bit more about, but ultimately what it is the opportunity to look across the country at the best 501c7 member-owned clubs in America, what they're doing. Frankly, sometimes to look at some of those that are struggling mightily and why that might be happening as well. And then to take our data, which we upload on an annual basis. We send over the trial balance and the audited financials for Ken and Club Benchmarking to do an analysis, to see where we sit, to see what some of our ratios and performance looks like. And so Ken's going to talk a little bit about the company Club Benchmarking, what they do, some about what just general best practices look like in both governance and finance, and then also some specifically about where Westwood sits and all of that. But it's my pleasure to introduce Ken Butler. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here. Good to be back at Westwood. I'll just also start off by saying that meetings like this are a best practice, and it's great to see that you're doing this because it really puts everybody on a different plane of knowledge, which we believe is really one of the most important things that is missing at many clubs. So I went backwards. Look at that. As Paul says, we need to keep going forward. So in essence, I'll keep the thing going forward. Anyway, Club Benchmarking started in 2009, and it started with our owner and founder, Ray Cronin, who was a first-time committee member at his club in Boston. I think he was on the grounds committee, and Ray is an engineer and an MBA. His first time at the club as a committee person after about 20 years of membership, he was astounded at the fact that they were making decisions in the grounds committee just based on various opinions. Of course, there's no lack of opinion in the club business, right? About everywhere you turn, you're going to find a different opinion. And so that got Ray thinking. And so he started looking at the possibility of creating a company that would be able to benchmark the private club industry against just other clubs. Most of them are 501c7s like yourself. Since then, we've been collecting the data, financial data and operating data and capital data of over 1,000 clubs a year. We have over 1,000 subscribers to our benchmarking platform as we stand today. And we study intently hundreds of those clubs every year, because one of the things we try to do is not just collect data and then report it back, but we try to study it and distill information out that's helpful for a club from a governing perspective and from an education perspective on really what drives the club forward financially. So we're talking a little bit about that today. But a couple of things that we've learned along the way and believe greatly in is that clubs that have a constantly flowing and forward-looking vision and have some detailed processes in governance and management are the clubs that are surviving. We believe that's a best practice look. And of course, it's ever-evolving membership experience that really drives the value of the club. That's a look at our team. I'll set foot in about 135 different clubs this year. About 30 of those will be sessions like this. The rest are just relationship and helping clubs get through the data. Most of us on the bottom there are former club managers like myself. I started in the business back in the mid-'80s, and then took a time off to own a restaurant for a while, so I guess you could say I'm a glutton for punishment. But we could probably begin and end the whole presentation just with this slide here. We believe very strongly in collecting data and using data as a basis for making decisions going forward. That's not always the case, as we've learned. I can look at this one, can't I? Yeah, very good. So some of the things that we've learned, and I'll just get into this quickly, is that the private club industry is a very small, fragmented cottage industry, if you will. About operating revenues total in the club industry in North America, about $40 billion. So it's not small, but it is very fragmented and insular, if you will, or siloed from club to club. And what happened is best practices do not disseminate very quickly, if at all. And the clubs that have a clear, constantly evolving vision with a progressive board and with a strong member commitment beneath that are the clubs that are surviving and doing very well. And another thing that we've learned about those clubs is that the clubs that are doing well have a membership base that acts more like stewards of the club than as customers of the club. And you're going to hear that theme go forward and be encouraged to be thinking like Paul said earlier about being representative of the entire membership, not just your interest group or your buddies at the club, but by thinking in a broad sense as volunteer leaders of the club. Another thing that we've learned by being in as many boardrooms as we can, we've been able to look at data and compare that to the behaviors that we see at clubs. And we've learned by being in 800 to 900 boardrooms just in the last 10 years alone, is that many boards and committees are stuck in the operating governance side of things and not necessarily on the strategic side. They're really focused on in the moment. If it's about finances, they're looking pretty much at last month's budget to actual and talking about things like pool water temperature or green speed or other things that are important from a membership experience standpoint, but not necessarily those things that need to be discussed in a forward-looking meeting format. So we really, if 90% of your time is spent on the governance side of it, try to think that through and flip that more to 90% on strategy if you can, and knowing that you have responsibilities to talk about operations, but it's not the only thing out there. So this is the state of the industry right here. We separate it because the data clearly separates like this, and it has for a long time now. We look at it in terms of the red, yellow, and green buckets, if you will. There's some distinct differences between the clubs that are not doing well versus clubs that are growing with purpose. The green bucket, about 25% of the industry. Okay, so out of 1,000 clubs, 25% are actually growing with purpose. All right, that's pretty alarming when you think about it, because the other 75% are either flat, static, or declining. So what's the difference? Why is that happening? Well, over in the green bucket, we find stronger balance sheets. Stronger balance sheets basically mean they're generating an appropriate amount of capital to support investments in the club. And that's capable because they have members who see themselves more as owners or stewards than as customers. The result of that is they have the highest initiation fees and the highest dues rates typically, and they have the most full member equivalents. So the clubs over on the red side, which is another 25% of our industry, believe that if they have initiation fees that are too high and dues that are too high, they're going to have more members. The data clearly shows that they don't. These clubs have the fewest members, but need the most. They have the weakest balance sheets because there's a general fear in the boardroom and committees around the club is that we have to do what we can to keep these low. And we can't afford to do some of the new things because our members will leave the club. And that's what gets them in trouble. One of the positive things that's happened in the club industry, and a lot of you are aware of what happened to clubs with golf, I'll say, country clubs, golf clubs during the pandemic, is that was a groundswell of popularity and people interested in joining clubs. And the private club advisor in front of you speaks to some of the reasons why. But this is another reason to be somewhat optimistic for the future. And just to give a long story short, this is birth rates in the United States going back to the greatest generation and up to today. The largest group that recently came through was the baby boomers. All right, and so the age 42 is an important number, and that's kind of what we're tracking here. I'm just going to decipher it for you real quick. But you see in the middle there, that middle peak, that was the 1999 was the end of a growth period from the baby boom of people that were 42 years old. That number started to decline in 1999 all the way to 2017. That means there were fewer 42-year-olds coming into the market. Now, what happened to the game of golf during that time? It started to spiral down and become less popular because there wasn't as many new members coming into a club, because 42 is an important age because that's the average age of a new member at a club. And it's been 42 for 30 or 40 years. It's not changed. It's true today. And so the good news then is that now we have the shadow boom from the baby boomers, and it's the millennial generation. Starting in around 2018 and continuing forward to about 2033, there's going to be an ever increasing number of 42-year-olds coming into the market, which is important because they're going to be interested in club membership. They're already demonstrated that they're interested in club membership. The question that clubs will have is what are they doing to remain relevant to that generation? And I would submit that the things that you've done here at Westwood certainly are in the slot for that generation. As when we look at your data, we clearly see that. So it's an excellent thing to keep an eye on. And we think there's a tailwind for the next 10, 15 years just on the average age of people joining clubs, and that number will be growing over okay, let me touch that screen. There we go. Okay, so what are the reasons, or why aren't all clubs in that green bucket? I mean, typically they could be, because it comes down to choices. But here's the two prevailing choices that we find in the club industry. We have, and it depends on how many members you have that are focused on these prevailing viewpoints. But it's kind of a tension of opposites in a way that you want to be efficient, right? But the club business model is not built on efficiency. It's built on membership experience. And membership experience is an expensive thing to provide if you quantify it and look at it, consider it from the number of venues you have available at any given time, the number of people that are using them at any given time, and the number of staff that you have to do it. So it's a very inefficient, it's a very high fixed cost business. So the efficiency view is the red bucket view. It's on the margins when they have decisions to make. They're leaning towards cost cutting or possibly even denying or shrinking the membership experience in order to fit a predetermined goal on a budget line. Whereas the green bucket clubs are more in the let's make this place great viewpoint. Or probably more accurately, let's make this place the best version of itself possible. And that's where you start thinking about the forward momentum of a club. Let's make the club great. I'm willing to pay for the services I want. Now, don't go crazy and double my fees overnight, but generally speaking, we want to see the club moving forward and offering things that we like. That's the difference between the efficiency view and the let's make this place great view. There's a lot of misconceptions among the membership. You hear it in the grill room, you hear it everywhere. And those misconceptions are right down the left side of the slide here. And again, you'll have this to look at, but just to point out a few, the club just isn't being run efficiently. That's one that we hear a lot of. But the data, the patterns of the data, the entire industry, especially clubs with golf, tells us that efficiency is not an issue in the club. In fact, it may only represent about 7% of all of your expenses. So you have 18 million plus in expenses at the club. As much as maybe 7% of those might be related to efficiency. And that's if you're inefficient, okay? And so that's somebody's problem, but it's probably not the committees and it's probably not the boards, right? It's probably the management teams, but it's not a strategic issue in clubs. It is a tactical issue. The food and beverage department should make money is another misconception. What we've learned by studying the data is that clubs that subsidize the food and beverage department more actually have a healthier balance sheet because they're offering more value, most likely. They have more members enjoying the club. They're charging more for the club, and they return more of a value to their membership than all the amenities, not just food and beverage. And it's not a standalone metric either. It's not saying, like, just lose more money in food and beverage, you're going to be great. You know, that's not the case. I mean, there's a whole thing, a whole group of metrics that combine to talk about that. So misconceptions and facts are sometimes counterintuitive in the club business. So where's the money go? I mean, we hear a lot of members talking about that from time to time. You know, I've been a member here for 30 years. I put in X thousands of dollars, and yet you say you need more to do these new projects. Where'd my money go? Well, over time, about 85% of all member money put in over time goes to the operation of the club. And that, you know, as we all learn, the operating of the club is at least a break-even proposition. It's not a net positive proposition. So it's not the financial driver of the club. And you'll see in a bit, I'm going to put up a slide that shows that in contrast to the entire industry. And you're going to find that 70% of clubs operate within a break-even zone. So the operations of the club are not a financial driver. It is just a vehicle for delivering the member experience overall. Okay, that's all it is. It gets consumed every year. Therefore, there's nothing left over of that 85% of all the money that comes in through the members. The financial driver is the operating ledger, where it's 15% of the member money over time has flown through the capital ledger, which is initiation fees and capital dues, and capital assessments and things of that nature. That's what moves the club forward. Another thing about clubs is that no matter where you are, which city you're in, what region of the country you're in, the business model is very, very consistent. The sources of money and the uses of money is identical, no matter where you are in here in the DMV or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, it is the same. You may have some things that are unique, like maybe your culture, maybe some circumstances, but the financial drivers of the club are not different. They're all the same. We talked a little bit about this earlier with the two ledgers. When we benchmark clubs, because you know, all clubs report their finances in slightly different ways from one another. It's not standard, and you know, it can still be, you know, generally accepted accounting principles, but it's still not done the same way. Because we benchmark, we will reformat and put into a standard book of accounts so that we can do clear apples to apples. So you might, when you look into studying the data from a benchmarking perspective, you might find some variances from what you report here versus what we see when we benchmark it, but that's only because we've standardized it and we don't leave anything out. We just reorganize it so that we can get true apples to apples. So we talked about the state of the industry in the red, yellow, and green bucket aspect. These are the 9 top KPIs that we look at to determine what bucket the club might be in. Okay, so there are operating KPIs there at the top and capital KPIs on the bottom. All clubs have a combination of red, yellow, and green in their KPIs. I haven't seen one that's solid green yet. I have seen solid red ones, but I have not seen a solid green. You have a very positive outlook. You are really a green bucket club, and especially the last 5 years where you're going. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But you see the lonely red one there? That's the dues ratio. That's the amount of dues to your operating revenue. So your operating revenue at 18+ million, and your dues is 36% of that, which we would say is a leveraged number. However, your non-dues revenues, especially the food and beverage side, is kind of an outlier and it's off the chart. If we were to normalize your food and beverage, because a club your size typically doesn't do 8 million plus in food and beverage, all right? It's going to be more like 3 million, all right? You're at 8 million. It's an outlier. Okay, just your member kick in on the food and beverage is over 4 million, which would still be an outlier to most clubs. Since this is a ratio of total operating revenue, it includes that outlier on food and beverage. So if we were to normalize that, your dues to revenue ratio would be closer to 50%. It probably wouldn't be 50%, but it would be closer to 50%. So I don't think, even though it shows as a leveraged number, and it's something that you should probably keep an eye on, we saw what happened during the pandemic. You know, when that 4 million is no longer there, you know, it creates some headaches, right? So the more of your operating revenue that is derived from operating dues, the better it's going to be, but probably not an alarming number for you. And then you have the sports allocation. Now this is non-golf sports. This is rackets, it's fitness, it's swimming, and anything that's not golf related. You spend a high amount of your fixed expenses on those, and that's a good thing. That's why it's green. You have 23%. All of your fixed expenses combined, 23%, almost a quarter of them are dedicated to the member experience in those sports. And that's important because it's not dedicated to the overhead of the club. It's, you know, it's to the member experience. Good stuff there. Operating result is in the break-even zone. Could easily be a green number. We say the break-even zone is between -4% of operating and +4% of operating. When we put it into the benchmarking platform, you're -3%, you're probably actually closer to zero. Next big one there is the net available capital. Net available capital number is what moves the club forward from a financial perspective. It's the free cash the club has to reinvest in its facilities, its property, plant, and equipment primarily, and to build cash reserves or to pay principal and interest on debt. You're at 15% in 2023. We think that number, based on what they're saw in the data and other green bucket clubs, is that a number every year over 20% is probably the best target for that. So what makes up net available capital? That's your initiation fees, capital dues, assessments. If you had an operating surplus, that would go in there too. All right. So think in terms of 20% or more on that. Net worth over time. This is the compounded annual growth rate of your unrestricted net assets, or the bottom line on the balance sheet, or shareholders' equity, whatever we call it, at the 3.1%. Now that you've had drastic growth in that in the last 4 or 5 years. Prior to that, it was kind of flat. And I'll show you that in a second. And then the net to gross property, plant, and equipment is very strong. You've done a lot of investment in the last few years. So you're at that 56% is saying that your net property, plant, and equipment is 56% of your gross property, plant. Right? The difference is depreciation. All right. So that's a very strong number at 56. We believe there's 5 things that every member of the club should understand, not just boards, not just committees, but I'm going to briefly go through those. Number 1 is that clubs are a high fixed cost business and expenses aren't bad. Those expenses that are going towards the membership experience should or are probably going to increase over time, not decrease. I mean, a lot of things influence that, but the number 1 thing is what your members want. Of course, inflation has a role in that, and recognizing that, and then counterbalance inflation with your fees and your dues to counteract that. But those operating expenses are key to the club's value proposition. And by cutting expenses to get to some artificial desire of bottom line department by department could be injurious to the club if you're taking that marginal approach and say, let's cut costs, as opposed to the other end of that spectrum with the green bucket clubs on the margins. When they think about a decision, they'll lean towards investing in the membership experience, and which includes raising dues and fees and things of that nature. This is a slide that just shows where you are on the spectrum of all clubs in 2023 on expenses per full member equivalent. As you can see, that your club is spending about $25,000 per full member equivalent. Now, full member equivalent, just quick, that's a calculation. It's not a head count. We'll talk about that in a second, but that's your total dues divided by your highest dues rate. And that's why we get the same across the industry. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but at the bottom here, you see where you are on full member equivalents, initiation fees, annual membership dues, net available capital, and the PPP ratio. The median of each of these quartiles, these are the red bucket clubs, these are the green bucket clubs over there. You can see that initiation fees are 10,000 here, they're 85,000 over there. You're at 105, you're over there, but you can also see that your operating expenses per full member equivalent is trending towards the 75th percentile, which would match where you are on most of your other metrics. So expenses are not bad. Number two, understanding the key drivers of success in the club. So this is the point that I made earlier about the operating result versus capital income. This is a look at the entire industry in 2023. When we look at these slides, we call out the middle, which is the median, or the 50th percentile, the 25th percentile over here, and the 75th percentile over there. The middle of all the clubs in here, and there's about 125 clubs in this for 2023 so far. The middle is literally zero, break even. Okay, so the industry, in the entire industry, the club industry is not driven by the operating result of the club. It's driven by the capital income of the club. So you'll see at the median, the capital income of the club is at 18% versus a flat break even on operations. And so you're basically in the break even zone, even though it's showing negative. But then you have your 20% of your net of it, your available capital, which is initiation fees, capital dues, and anything else that falls under that. That's the financial driver of the club, and that's really where the focus should be from a strategic standpoint. Funding the operating footprint to establish the value for the member experience, and then getting enough capital generation from the membership to further the investment in the club. So just another iteration of the same thing, efficiency. We are in the membership experience business. Beyond that, to support the membership experience, the most important thing to do then is to have proper capital planning to support that. Clubs are high capital intense industry. I think your capital intensity ratio is somewhere around 255 to 280%. I can't remember exactly where it was. I calculated it a couple days ago. That's as an industry, that's among the highest capital intensity ratios that you'll find. The highest is probably energy generation and delivery, 293%. Clubs are just under that. So we're in the capital planning and investment business, probably more than anything else from a strategic standpoint. Understanding the concept of net worth. I'll just breeze through this a little bit. This is over 1,000 clubs since 2006, looking at compound annual growth rate of the club's net worth. You'll see you're there at 3.1%. And we put a benchmark in there for Country Club of Virginia with their permission, just to show in the next slide the consistency of growth there and what we believe is a best in class case and something for other clubs to strive to. Now, when we say strive to, we're not talking about being the same type of club and the same amenities and the same type of stuff. We're talking about it from a financial perspective, same patterns of growth. So you see here, this is what your chart would look like from 2006 to now. And you see a huge uphill spike starting in around 2018 to 2019. And before that, it was fairly flat, okay? And so what causes that? All right, operating result is break even. So that's not having an effect on this at all. What has the effect on this is the amount of capital income you have versus your depreciation. If capital income is higher than depreciation, it goes up. That's all there is. And we believe that should grow at a pace of at least 3.5% every year, but ideally more than 5% each year, so you can stay ahead of your capital needs. We'll talk a little bit about the balance sheet, but not a whole lot of time on that. The thing that to really understand about the balance sheet is that capital income from a member first throws into member equity, but is ultimately going to be invested in property, plant, and equipment. And that property, plant, and equipment is probably about 80% of all the assets you own. The other one is going to be cash, and there's very few other assets that are there. So 90% of your asset base is either property, plant, equipment, or cash. That's why that capital income is so important. And finally, we talk about the competing on value versus competing on price. The successful clubs compete on the value of their membership experience, not the price they charge. And I think you get that here. It's obviously when we look at it and we talk to you, Paul alluded to something along the lines of this before. This just takes it a step further and says, okay, this is the best practice. We don't believe that assessments, especially for your obligatory capital, are a good idea. We believe that that's reactionary, not proactive. So the best source in a low attrition market like we're in right now, the best source for obligatory capital maintenance is going to be a capital dues. Capital dues, right, for the last couple of years has been trending closer and closer to 20% of operating dues across the industry. It's not there yet, but it's been getting inch by inch, it's been getting there. And then the practice of that capital dues is actually moving along with your operating dues too, as opposed to past practice at many clubs where it's a static number and it stays that number for a long time. We believe that aspirational capital, and these are the new things you would add to the club, or a major renovation that changes something dramatically, is the sources of that. Best sources for that is going to be initiation fees and or debt. So this, just to reiterate, you know, the needs of the club from a membership experience and from a capital needs perspective is based on the size of the footprint and the desires of the quality of the membership. As far as the delivery of that, it doesn't belong in. It's not going to come from the conjecture in the grill, in other words. And Ray, there's our founder. There's a Jack. Where do we go? Okay, here we go. So a little bit on governance. We've done some things by studying the data and by being in hundreds of clubs every year. We've learned something about what the data and the KPIs look like, and then mirrored that to the behaviors that we see at the club. And this is all about the question is like, what takes a club backward and what can push a club forward? And we believe it's in the folks in this room have the ability to move the club forward just through behavior alone. We told this before. I just remind you that this is a big thing to try to change, which I don't think you're in there. But we know that great governance starts with an understanding of the business model, not necessarily in overlaying the knowledge of from your own businesses, because many times it's going to be counterintuitive. You know, the club business model is very strange. How many businesses can you think of where the owners are the only customers and you get to set your own prices, right? Does human nature say you're going to set your prices too low or too high? Yeah, probably too low for the most part. So we're looking at this. I mean, you mentioned Copland, Keebler, and Wallace. Dick Copland, who was the founder of that firm, has a famous saying. He says that board members and committee members govern, managers manage, and members enjoy. Okay, and so what that means is that as board and committee people, you're not managers. You know, you're not directing the day-to-day operations, more or less. You enjoy it, and then you know, and Brian and his staff, of course, are leading the charge on that. And so the roles in terms of management should be consistent over time in that regard, which I believe they are in your case. So when we talk about boards and committees adding value, what are some of those things? And this is what we've learned. Number one is convincing your fellow members that they are stewards and not customers of the club. You're always going to have a mix of folks. So hopefully it's a smaller percentage of folks that see themselves as transactional customers versus aspirational stewards or owners of the club. I prefer to use the word steward because we're leaving the club to the next group, the next board, the next committee, the next generation, as opposed to just saying, well, what am I getting out of it today and why does it have to cost more tomorrow? We talked a lot about looking forward strategically, staying out of operations, fostering that culture of innovation to meet the future, thinking outside of the box. Clubs are prone to something that Ray Cronin, our chairman, calls the cult of personality. Is that if you get away from data-based decision making, then you're going to fall prey to the cult of personality, or the most charismatic person in the room, the person that dominates the discussion in the committee meetings. So we think that data-driven decision making is the antidote to that when that happens, and it happens naturally in the club. I mean, there's no lack of type A personalities across the club, right? So if we look at several key questions, and you look at, and this is something that you can look at later. I'm not going to read this verbatim, going piece by piece, but these are the behaviors that we've noticed by looking at the data and then going into the clubs and spending time with those clubs and getting to know their managers and their boards and their committee people. And these are the behaviors in the green bucket that we believe will move a club forward, while the behaviors over here on the red bucket club are the ones that will drag the club backwards or keep it static. Neither one of those things is good. And you take a look at this and read through these, and I would suggest that if you find an abundance of any of these behaviors over in the red bucket, take an evaluation of what's going on in the committee room to assess, okay, is this positive for us? Is this healthy? Let's talk it through and coach our members through this so that we are constantly moving forward and being productive at the same time. So this is what separates great clubs from weak clubs. A very quick comparison. We talk a lot about the customers and owners thing. What makes a great volunteer leader, which would be y'all? Okay, and talks about anything from committee selection to board elections to the people who think they know better. One of the things you'll want to combat against at the committee, you've probably seen it already. A committee member comes into the committee and says, everyone's saying this, everyone's complaining about that. Is that a data-based way to start the conversation, or is it really just one person and it's a way to get the attention on? Be thinking about that. So the IKB crowd, the I know it all crowd, or the I know better crowd, can sometimes bring things down into weeds a little bit too far to a level that's not productive, be it in the boardroom or in a committee room. And on the management team for that matter. What makes a great club member? And we talked a little bit about adding value. That is trying to convince them that they are actually stewards and they have a responsibility to move the club forward. There's a comment here. I don't trust the staff or the board. Why do we need more things than just golf? These are the things that we hear all the time, as opposed to I am a steward and I care about the entire club and I'm willing to contribute and act as necessary. This is what makes a great senior staff person or an operations leader of the club, along the same lines. If your committee is getting to the point to where your staff member cohort is to the point to where they don't feel comfortable speaking up in the meeting, and something's probably not going right. And that's what we talk about here. As a former general manager, I thought I had thick skin, but there's some times where it's just not easy at all. Okay, so that is the crux of mine. Now there is a ton of data throughout this that talks about the data behind those 5 things that we talked about. And so I know I'm running up to my time now, so I am going to just flip through these so that when you see these, you can see some of the things that we look at. There's the dues ratio, the dues engine, the food and beverage aspect here. Okay, so you can see where you are in the food and beverage deficit as it relates to your dues revenue. So how much of your dues is actually supporting the deficit of food and beverage? Well, you're right in the middle of this group of clubs, which makes it kind of normal, Now the thing about this too is that the clubs that are down here more towards the 25th percentile, those are the green bucket clubs. Those are the ones that are embracing food and beverage as an amenity more so than as a profit center. It's counterintuitive, but it's true. This is the club business model at its most interesting at sometimes. There's some other data here along those lines and things of that nature. So there's a lot here. It's designed for you to read as well as hear in a presentation. And then I'll kick it back to Brian.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Ken, thank you very much. So, Ken, don't go too far because we do want to offer up the opportunity for any questions. We're obviously thrilled to have Ken and Club Benchmark here with us at the session this evening. There is a ton of data, as Ken mentioned, and we are going to circulate the entirety of this deck, which does include that appendix. So you can get as granular as you like with a lot of the numbers, metrics, ratios that Ken and Club Benchmarking have identified as important and critical numbers for us to understand, not just about our club, but about the industry as a whole. So when we circulate those, we encourage you. Some of this will inevitably go over your head. I know it went over mine a couple of times, but after spending some great time with Ken and the team, it's really interesting, I think, and quite frankly, just a very unique business model to most that people are familiar with. So are there any questions from the audience of anyone here in the room that either Ken or Paul or I can answer? Anything in the chat box online? Hope everybody's still with us out there in virtual world. They may have tuned into the 7-7 tie that's happening.
I do have one question.
The database answer is that, oh, it's 1410.
No, sorry. We have an update. That will not be in the slides.
The one question I just want to ask everybody is when we talked about the list of priorities for the year and goals and objectives, is there anything that you think is missing? Anything that you would add or that we're missing the boat by not addressing? Okay, well, I would invite you all to continue to think about that, and if something comes to later, please let us know. We'd love your feedback on it.
Okay, so without any questions at the moment, like I said, we're going to circulate. We have a recording of this presentation. We'll try to get to any of the committee members who couldn't attend either in person or virtually tonight. We hope it's helpful to them. We certainly hope it's been helpful to all of you, and sincerely appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Like I said, this is a new exercise for our club, but I think a really valuable one as we move into an efficient and effective year. So if you're not already at your table with the committee that you're serving on, if you could try to make your way there, we're just going to give a few minutes for a brief breakout session, just talk about what we heard today. Real quickly on the schedules moving forward. So each of your committee chairs is going to share the schedule. We typically try to stay with a consistent, second Tuesday or third Wednesday of the month for each of you. So you'll hear from your committee chairs in that regard. They'll send out official calendar invites, often with virtual, Zoom credentials and the opportunity that's necessary. A couple things, excuse me, that I will touch on. The Finance Committee meets the Tuesday prior to the board. The board typically meets on the final Tuesday of each month. Just so each of you know that, that's part of why the committees meet earlier in the month, so that feeds up to both the finance and the board level. From the annual meeting is already set for Tuesday, November 19th. So that sort of culminates the end of the year of our fiscal year and our presentation of our financial performance, but also any of the actions that are going to take place throughout. And so one of those things that we're obviously focused on achieving and moving forward is this 5-year long-term strategic plan that will require all of your involvement and assistance moving forward. So if you can make your way to tables for the breakout session, we're not going to take a whole lot more of your time, but that's it for the evening. For those of you on Zoom, we're going to go ahead and cut the meeting off. It won't be an opportunity to participate virtually in this, but we thank you for being with us tonight as well. Thanks, everybody.